Joining me now is a good friend of the show, good friend of Rebel News, Tom Harris from the International Climate Science Coalition. Tom, I got to tell you, you're my brother-in-law's, well, at least one of his favorite regular guests on the Gun Show. And I wanted to have you on. I know it's been too long since I've had you on, but you have just released a new book. And I think it's an easy read. It's an 88-page book published by Canadians for Sensible Climate Policy. And it is Energy and Climate at a Glance, the Canadian edition. Tell us why you published this book.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the Heartland Institute 2 years ago published Climate and Energy at a Glance for students and teachers, and it's been very successful. Many, many people have used it, and we thought, hey, this would be great to have something like that for Canada. So Canadians for Sensible Climate Policy, which people can check out at sensible.change.ca, they teamed up with Heartland, since Heartland had all the facilities for printing and everything else and the expertise to actually put it together properly. And Sterling Burnett from Heartland Institute worked with John Zacharias to produce this. And I'm a contributing author. It's just 88 pages, and it goes through virtually everything you can imagine, okay? It talks about what are Canada's targets. What are the things that they want to do to actually achieve those targets? How would we do it? It's not feasible, of course. Then it talks about the impact of what would happen if we did it, okay? The massive impact on the average person, charging $55,000 or more per house when you buy it because of all this climate stuff. And then it gets into the science. And it shows things like this, climate-related deaths, okay? Everybody says, oh my God, there's this massive emergency, an existential threat around the world.
Right.
But you look at the deaths and it's gone way, way down. Now, part of it is because, it's obvious that we have better remote sensing. We can actually forecast when hurricanes are coming. But it's also because extreme weather has not increased. Okay? If you look at the best database of its kind in the world, it's called the NOAA Extreme Weather Database for states. It's weather records on a statewide basis. And individual towns don't really matter so much because the bottom line is you're going to have an increase in temperature because of the city growing and you have the urban heat island. But in the case of states, it's a bigger area, so it makes sense. So they track maximum temperature, minimum temperature, most wind, most snow, biggest hailstone. Colorado had a hailstone half a foot in diameter, if you can imagine that. And here's a question, a skill testing question I always ask my audiences. And again, this is the best database of its kind in the world, okay? Now, it's not the whole world, but it is very much, an American thing. And it's interesting because in 1936, during the Dust Bowl, there were 27 extreme weather records set, 27, highest temperature and all those other things. And those records still stand today, if you can believe that. So I asked my audience, and I did this just the other day when I was speaking to farmers, I say, and how many extreme weather records do you think were set this year so far on a statewide basis in the United States? None. Yeah, you're right. So you win a book. So we decided that this had to be done. Actually, Canadians for Sensible Climate Policy contacted me and asked me to help out, which I am. And we're selling them now on our website for $22. And you can actually, that includes tax and shipping. And you go to our website and you actually click on the donate button. It takes you to a page and fill in $22 in the custom amount for the website, because you can otherwise choose fixed amounts like $50 and things. And there's a place where you can put comments and you just say, for the Green Book, because we're calling it the Green Book. And, this has been authored by President of Friends of Science, Ron Davidson. You probably know him. And with Michelle's group. And it's also authored by Sterling Burnett, and a group of us are contributing authors. So yeah, we're selling this all over the place. If people want it in a hurry, we can courier it because Canada Post is on strike right now. But this is a wonderful thing to carry around and to put under the Christmas tree.
I was just going to say, this is a great Christmas gift for the climate skeptic in your life, but also for the liberal in your life, the people who is they're the true believers in the climate hysteria and this net zero nonsense. They really need to understand what it means to pursue net zero, the cost, and the burden, the financial burden that cities and consumers will have to bear, because you hear the Liberals talk about it in the House of Commons. As part of my job is to listen to the Liberals lie to us in the House of Commons. But to really break it down, and that's what I think Friends of Science really does well too, is break down what these huge macro issues really mean to your pocketbook. What is it
Oh
going
yeah.
to cost me when you're already struggling to put groceries in the fridge in a time of inflation? How much is it going to cost to fill up the minivan to take kids to hockey? Those are the things people really care about.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's so often built on the backs of lies. I was reading through some of the data that you sent over. And, this is something that's near and dear to my heart here in Alberta, because every time there's a forest fire, they want to hike the carbon tax. And Jasper just burned thanks to decades of mismanagement of the forest there. And yet still they say it's a climate issue and not a pine beetle issue.
Yeah. Well, we actually deal with that issue in the book. We show the actual amount of ground that's being burned, amount of forest. And oh, here's a cool graph. I love this one. It shows Canada's contribution to world emissions. It's 1.5%. It's just about nothing. And, you're talking about the cost in our pocketbook. I wanted to give you one number that I used in a presentation just recently to farmers. These huge Peterbilt trucks that ship cattle, they ship wheat, all sorts of things. They're massive, big trucks. They have a 300-gallon diesel fuel tank. Well, it costs about $2,000 to fill it up. It's pretty expensive. By 2030, the carbon tax at the current rate of increase will be $700 every time you fill up your tank when you're one of these truck drivers. $700. And so, the numbers are incredible. It's all sort of hidden, and you don't actually see it when you go to the pump. But imagine paying $700 every time you fill up your tank of one of these big trucks to ship us our food. So, of course, the price is going to go through the roof because everything that we buy has to be shipped somehow. And, and of course, the fact is, none of the main developing countries are doing this at all. I mean, China, believe it or not, is still considered a developing country.
Right. World's second largest economy.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, there's a clause in the Framework Convention on Climate Change, which underlies the Paris Agreement, that says the first and overriding priority for developing countries is poverty alleviation and development. So since coal is the cheapest form of electricity, that's what they're using because, of course, it allows them to develop quickly. Now, you'd laugh, Sheila. The various reporters cornered the Chinese ambassador when the COP was held, the Conference of the Parties that we'll talk about in a minute, was held in Peru. And they asked him, would you consider changing parts of the Framework Convention so that developing countries don't have this out clause? And he said, these were practically the exact words. He said, oh, no, the purpose of the Paris Agreement is to enforce the Framework Convention, not to change it. So China has an out clause. A lot of people will say, well, China has to cap their emissions in 2030. Well, that's what Paris says, but the underlying treaty, which is the Framework Convention, which takes precedence, and actually in the Paris Agreement, it says the Framework Convention is the basic rule. It says that their first and overriding priority is poverty alleviation development, not greenhouse gas reduction. So come 2030, when their emissions, well, now it's double the United States. By then it'll be triple. Their emissions are going through the sky. People are going to say, hey, you have to cap them now. And they'll say, nope, we got an out clause. It's right here. And the truth is they never have to reduce emissions. And of course, China's building coal stations all over the world. So if you were concerned about greenhouse gases, and our book shows why you shouldn't, then China is going to just take over everything that we do. It's funny. You look at Ottawa, for example, city of Ottawa, city of Calgary, similar. Mm-hmm. They have these multi-billion-dollar climate plans. And yet the impact on climate is so tiny, even for the whole of Canada. You can't even measure it. I mean, it's just trivial.
And it's wild that, our government has signed on to the Paris Agreement, where, as you say, the explicit motive of this is poverty alleviation. In China, and not reductions in emissions, but to do that, you have to inflict poverty on Canadians.
Yeah, that's right. And Guilbeault just announced at the COP, which we'll talk about in a second, the Conference of the Parties, the UN Climate Conference in Azerbaijan. He just announced that he's proposing a worldwide tax on marine shipping, another carbon tax, and I mean, so they don't, I've never seen a tax they don't like. I love it when you interview Chris Sims, because actually she did a very good X that I shared with you. Very good X presentation on, okay, we got another carbon tax coming, thanks to our Mr. Guilbeault, the former Greenpeace tower scaler.
Yeah. Climbed Rob Klein's house.
And I sent you a graph from this book, which I think is really interesting. It shows when the maximum temperatures were set provincially and territorially across Canada. And what you can see is it is true that, BC set their records in the 2000s. But look at Alberta, 113 degrees Fahrenheit, 1937.
Yeah.
Okay. Nova Scotia, 100.9 degrees, 1935. So the beauty of this book is it has, first of all, easy to understand language. It's easy to carry around. It's just a little book. You wouldn't believe that's 88 pages, but it is, because they're very efficient. But it has graphs and figures that just make you laugh. I mean, they're not comical. They're not putting in cartoons, but it just looks so ridiculous. Oh, when was the record for Saskatchewan or whatever? It's nuts.
Well, and it debunks the hysteria. It debunks the hysteria that it's getting warmer. It's not. That extreme weather is getting worse. It's not. That there are more forest fires than ever. There aren't.
There's not.
Fire seasons.
Yeah.
They seem to be worse in places that people know, because in many of the places that people know, like Jasper, the feds are in charge. And I think that's necessary, because a lot of people just believe the TV. The politicians said this, the experts said this, and the experts are so often activists and not scientists at all. I mean, I recall for, about 4 years, the world believed that Greta Thunberg was some sort of climate scientist. And I think the world still believes that David Suzuki is one.